There is always this discussion about what could be the next US state. I've seen those discussions on the internet before, and I've always wondered, because there are some places that are like US territories, like Puerto Rico, who are not a state but they are US territory, which could also become a state one day. Who knows? And I'm sure there are other territories in which have been discussed to be the 51st state. So why is it so hard for there to be a 51st US state? I would personally think it's because 50 is just a better number. 50, a round figure, 50. That just sounds better. It just sounds better. I mean, it can be saying 52 states. But that it doesn't have the same ring to it. So this should be a fun one. Let's see why it's so hard for it to happen like that. Let's get right into it.
This is a day in American history that will live in infamy. On January the 6th, 2021, just a few critical minutes before the invaders, attackers, occupiers, or whatever you want to call them, had overcome the Capitol Police at around 2 p.m. local time, the chief of the US Capitol Police Force and the mayor of Washington, D.C. put out urgent requests for guard backup. But it took more than an hour to get formal approval for their deployment, and then nearly 3 more hours for the first guard reinforcements to arrive. This shouldn't have happened, but it did. And that's because DC is not a US state. Normally, the National Guard stationed in other states are
First of all, I like how he said that occupiers, invaders, I don't know how you want to call it. Yeah, those are the right words to use. Insurrectionists, no. Like, if you actually think that was an insurrection, I think you've lived in a bubble in your whole life. You've lived in a bubble. You don't know what an insurrection really means. An insurrection without, like, people, if that was an insurrection, that is like the dumbest insurrection I have ever seen in my whole life. And I understand it's just political. I know Democrats have to put out that word because it sounds more inflammatory. I do understand where they are coming from, but some of the masses that actually do believe that was an insurrection, and you need to get your brain checked, seriously, because that is not an insurrection. It's just not. And obviously, I do know that it wasn't a good thing. Like, if you actually want to do a protest, stand outside there, do your protest, do your chanting, everything. But actually going into it, like, even though you were not really violent, but you know how your opposition is going to twist it. We all know that. And I've seen the videos in which the security personnel actually opened it for those people to enter. But you should know better. You should just know better. You know that they're going to twist it. So, and I really feel sorry for some of them, because some of them have been sent to prison. Like, when I saw some of those things, I was like, what? But at the end of the day, I blame them, because, like, you shouldn't do that. If you want to take action, you take action properly, meaning you go with guns, or you stand outside and protest. That is just it. Make it like, because when you go into there and even though you didn't really cause that much violence, but you vandalized things, you did one or two things there like that made America look bad. It made the United States of America look bad, look clownish. That is just the fact of the matter. So they shouldn't have done it, but man, anybody that causes an insurrection doesn't really know what because an insurrection without a bunch of guns, I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me. A bunch of gun owners, because probably most of these people are gun owners, going there without guns. Some people were saying that they probably had guns in their vehicles. So let's say that is the case. So they dropped the guns in their vehicles to actually go and do a quote unquote insurrection without guns. I mean, come on now, come on. I know you are partisan, your side versus the other side, but at least use some sense. Seriously.
Normally, the National Guard stationed in other states are under the command of those states' governors. But here, they're under the command of the president. And as a result, the District of Columbia National Guard was on hold until it got the approval of the Department of Defense to deploy forces. Obviously, this delay was costly. And the very next day, the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, asserted her stance that D.C. needed to become a state. It's true, if D.C. had been a state, the National Guard's deployment would have been faster, as clearance from the DoD DC wouldn't have been needed. And yet, this isn't even a major reason as to why most residents of DC want statehood. During the height of the pandemic, each state received $1.25 billion, yet DC only received $500 million, losing out on a huge $750 million, only because it wasn't a state. And by the way, this is still not the main reason that residents are fighting for statehood. If you've ever been to DC, you've probably spotted the words taxation without representation, or at least something very close to it, on t-shirts, ad boards, and DC's favorites, on license plates. Yes, the standard Washington DC license plate design has featured some form of the slogan, taxation without representation. Even former presidents Barack Obama and Bill Clinton's presidential limo plates had the slogan. And that's what the residents of one of the highest tax-paying districts want. Representation in Congress, the right to self-governance. You see, historically, DC was formed to be a seat of government, the political capital of the US by Congress, and free of influence from any state. Congress chose Maryland and Virginia to give up chunks of their states, and the capital city of the US was born. Because DC became the capital for the very reason that no one would influence the government, Congress was allowed exclusive jurisdiction.
Okay, DMV. Okay, I've always heard that stuff. I've always heard that word DMV. Okay, so that is just that area. Okay. Maryland and Virginia.
Residents were not allowed to vote for just about anything, not for a president, a senator, or a House representative. However, residents didn't accept it. There were strings of protests and draft bills followed, none of which had passed as a law. But hundreds of years later, DC residents were eventually allowed to vote for the president that would move into their city by virtue of the 23rd Amendment in 1961, and voted for their first time ever in the 1964 election. The district never went on to be represented in Congress though, besides for a single non-voting delegate in the House of Representatives. It was at this time that DC residents began to push for statehood, which is arguably a constitutional right under Article 4 of the Constitution. But to become a state, a territory must fulfill a number of requirements. First of all, a territory can only become a state where it is not a territory found within another state. If it is, the state that it is going to cede must consent. DC is all good on this one, as it is a district not within any state. The second requirement is that the citizens from that territory must petition in favor of statehood. DC is set here as well. Back in 2016, there was a referendum and 86% of residents voted in favor of statehood. The third is that the state-to-be territory must have sufficient population and resources to afford a state government and contribute its fair share to the federal government. DC checks this box as well. It has a larger population than two other states, Vermont and Wyoming. And residents of DC pay more in federal taxes per person than in any other state. So with all of the requirements being met, what comes next? Well, standard procedure to become a state involves drafting a constitution and getting approval from residents, Congress, and the president in that order. DC almost always gets through the primary stages of drafting and ratifying a constitution, but gets shot down by Congress. You see, DC is a historically Democrat district, so Democrats in Congress favor the statehood of DC as it affords them 2 more Democrats in the Senate if it becomes a state. That's a huge advantage, and because of that, it's highly unlikely that any Republican senator would vote in favor of statehood, which we've seen. So the real barrier to entry as the 51st state is more so politics than anything else. Now, if DC became a state, wouldn't that mean the federal government seat would be within a state, and that would contradict the very reason that DC became a district in the first place? Well, yes, that's true, and also kinda confusing, I know. But DC's government has already thought about this, and it has come up with a plan. Take a look at this map. The part carved out at the center will include the White House, Federal Supreme Court, and other federal offices and will be called the Capitol. It will be under the exclusive jurisdiction of Congress. The rest will be the state of Washington, D.C., but the D.C. won't be standing for District of Columbia anymore. Instead, it'll commemorate former D.C. resident and African-American social reformer and writer Frederick Douglass. D.C. would stand for Douglass Commonwealth. But DC isn't the only one eyeing all the benefits that statehood brings. 1,500 miles south from DC is another territory that is vying to reap all the benefits that come with being a state, Puerto Rico. Back in 1898, the US won the Spanish-American War and acquired a group of islands collectively called Puerto Rico. Although Puerto Rico ended up having limited self-governance, a few years later, the US began treating the island more like its own. Because of the Jones-Shafroth Act, anyone who was born in Puerto Rico became a US citizen. The act also allowed residents of Puerto Rico to elect their own non-voting representatives to the House, known as the Resident Commissioner. But Puerto Ricans still couldn't vote for a president or have a voting representative. Decades later, the island had its own constitution that made it an associated independent state within the United States. Many were happy with this new status, as referendums in 1967 and 1998 both resulted in the majority of Puerto Ricans voting to maintain the status as Commonwealth. But serious demands to become a state started to come around the early 2000s, and as these demands for statehood started to grow, a referendum was finally held in 2012, with the highest ever turnout of 78%, and for the first time ever, Puerto Ricans chose to become a state in the Union, with a 61% majority vote. After the referendum though, then President Barack Obama received 3 letters, one from the governor of Puerto Rico, one from the House representative, and one from the governor-elect. The governor and the representative urged him to begin the process of admitting Puerto Rico as the 51st state, while the governor-elect said in his letter that the results weren't clear. The representative introduced a bill a year later to admit Puerto Rico as a state, but it didn't go through. There were 2 more referendums, one in 2017 and another in 2020. The 2017 referendum saw 97% of votes favoring statehood, but with a voter turnout of just 23%. Obviously, the score was exaggerated and also said to be boycotted. The last one in 2020 is by far more reliable, with a turnout of 54%, and still a 52% majority voted for statehood. But Puerto Rico's statehood isn't as close as DC's. For one, Puerto Ricans haven't shown clear enthusiasm about being a state. Sure, the last 3 referendums resulted in a majority vote favoring statehood, but with the low turnout percentage, it's still unclear if the majority of Puerto Ricans prefer it. On top of that, you have the political interests.
To be honest with you, I'm not really sure they should want to be a state. I mean, the position that they are now is great. Everybody that is born in Puerto Rico automatically becomes a US citizen. Because at the end of the day, let me sit down and think of the benefits of actually being part of the United States. To be honest with you, let me try and think of it. Maybe I'm missing something here, but I don't really see that much of a benefit. I don't really see. If people that are born in Puerto Rico are automatically US citizens, so they are still under the protection of the United States government, right? So, which is the benefit that is supposed to be, because being a citizen of the United States is is a privilege in my opinion. So if you can already get that, then what other use does it have really? Well, to be honest, I really don't know. Maybe you can help me down in the comments, because as I was just watching this right now, I was just thinking about this in my head. Why would they want to be a state? I could get DC wanting to be a state because it's political. It's a political move. DC is always Democrat, always Democrat. So I could understand them wanting to have a seat in Congress so that it would, add to Democrat seats and all that kind of. So that is just political. It's just, let's try and find a way and join the Congress or whatever. But Puerto Rico, I really don't see the point, to be honest with you.
Have the political interests that will be affected if Puerto Rico becomes a state. Puerto Rico has a population of more than 3 million, so if it attains statehood, it will have 2 senators and up to 5 House representatives, at the expense of big states like New York and California, who have more seats than what's average. If, against these odds, Puerto Rico still achieves statehood, the benefits are immense. Puerto Rico has been hit hard by natural disasters as well as a tanking economy. So, unlike DC, which has one of the richest residents in the whole country, federal relief packages are seriously needed. While on current political terms, Puerto Rico can't even vote for the president, so statehood will guarantee political participation. Though of course, DC and Puerto Rico aren't the only ones in the race for statehood, with other territories like Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands lagging far behind them. But it seems likely that DC has the best chance of all of them at becoming the 51st state, as residents have almost clearly expressed their desire for statehood. But the road is long and hard, and there hasn't been a new state since 1959. I'm honestly just curious as to how the US flag would look with 51 stars. But nevertheless, the journey to becoming the 51st state continues.
Wow, that was a very interesting video. Especially with him starting with the whatever you want to call it, riot, whatever, protests, whatever you want to call it. Starting with that, it was a very interesting intro to this particular topic, because Okay. I can see why, because when I was watching that video of that incident, I was like, it almost looked like a setup. It almost looked like a setup because it could have easily been stopped immediately. But now, watching this video, it actually explains it a bit better, because since it wasn't a state, they couldn't call all the enforcement that was necessary to come and stop it before it escalated. So looking at the video, you may think it was like a setup so that they can come in and actually do what they want to do, so that the videos will be out there and Trump will look bad. But wow, that is interesting. That is very interesting. I think it's going to be very, very hard for that, because Republicans in Congress will have to look at it that way. It's politics. It's politics at the end of the day. If DC becomes a state, that is 2 extra seats in Congress. That is not good. If Puerto Rico becomes a state, we all know Puerto Rico is going to vote Democrats. Well, I mean, we all know that. We all know that. If Puerto Rico, so that is what, 5 seats in Congress, like this guy said, 2 in Senate. That is no. If Republicans ever allow that to be voted in, then that's stupid. Really, that's stupid. Because at the end of the day, Democrats will do the same thing. Actually, I think Democrats will even do worse. So you have to protect your own interests as well. So no need to try and be trying to be like the good guy and trying to, let's just allow. No. You can't allow them to become states, because that is just more Democrats party. That's just more power for the Democrats party. So I'm not on any side here. Just make it very, very. I'm just very logical, and I just look at things in a very logical, objective way. Though, like I've always said on this channel, if I were in the US, I would probably vote Republican, because I think a lot of Democrats' policies make no sense to me. Really, like except maybe I was very, very poor, then maybe welfare and all those other things that Democrats offer could be fine. But if I was a law-abiding, productive citizen, I just don't see any reason why I would vote Democrats. It makes no sense. It's counterproductive for my own life, really. Like, why would I vote for a party that is lenient to criminals? I just can't do that. And that actually shows in polls. More the richer you get, the higher probability that you vote Republican. It's just the reality. And I'm not saying I'm rich. I'm just saying that the kind of, like, when I see some of these videos of looters going to shops and picking up things, like those are crazy to, like, that is just mad. I just can't imagine it. A Democrat will look at that like that is fine, that is okay. But to me, that is insane. That is absolutely insane. So if that is the kind of world that they want to build, I wouldn't want to be in that kind of world, really. So anyway, that is not really my business. I'm not a US citizen, but I'm just saying. Anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments. I will see you on the next one. Thank you for watching. Peace.